Hello guys, my name is Zach Rowe. I'm a personal trainer here at the Lakewood YMCA, and here today I'm going to show you some stretches and some myofascial release for your hips. You know, with these coronavirus times, a lot of you might be working at home or you're sitting a lot, watching TV, this, that, and the other. And when you're sitting down for long periods of time, you kind of get tight hip flexors, which can affect your posture and your movement. So we want to try and avoid that as much as possible. So I'm going to show you some different stretches and whatnot to correct that, all right? So hip flexors, right here, you can kind of feel for your hip bones right here, the pointy parts. Your hip flexors, your iliacus and your psoas are right in there, and they do hip flexion, this movement right here. The opposing movement is hip extension, back behind you, and that's what your glutes do. So on top of the corrective exercises or stretches I'm showing you, doing glute exercises will help, but we're not going to cover that in this video. Just stretches for the hip flexors. All right, so iliacus and psoas. First stretch we're going to do for that is a static stretch. Static stretches you want to sit and hold for at least 20 seconds, 30 seconds, possibly even more. Kneeling hip flexor stretch right here. Sitting on your knee, and you're just going to push your hips forward. You should feel a stretch right here in the front of your back leg. That's a hip flexor. All right, you're just going to sit and hold. If you want to, you can add a little bit of lean to the side, and that'll help get a deeper stretch. When you're stretching, what you're trying to do is get the origin point and the insertion point of the muscle as far away as possible. So this little extra bend will kind of help elongate the muscle more. And we'll switch to the other side. Just turn 180. Sitting, I like to put my hand on the hips and just push forward just a little bit. Feel that stretcher in here. Again, hold for 20-30 seconds or even longer if you can. And let those muscle fibers lengthen. All right, so that's our first stretch. Next, we're going to get into myofascial release. You need some kind of tool for that. The best tool, in my opinion, is it's called a Pso-Right, and it is a myofascial release tool for your psoas. This is not required, although I'd highly recommend it. It does cost a little bit of money, but say you do work from home a lot and you're sitting a lot during the day, and then you notice like tight flexors tends to be a recurring problem for you. You might want to try and invest in this, all right? So I'll demonstrate how to use it. You're just gonna put it down on the ground and kind of get into a plank position. Start a little bit higher up on your belly, kind of scooch forward until you're right in between those two hip bones that I showed you. And once you're sitting on them and just kind of let your hips sink into it, you'll definitely feel it right away. If you've never done this before, it might hurt a little bit, I'll be honest. Once you do it more and your hip flexors aren't quite as tight, it won't be necessarily as bad. But you're just going to sit and hold and just let that muscle release, all right? Once you're done, come on up. So these little prongs here are what drive into your hip flexors and help release it. You can't really use a standard foam roller because your hip flexor muscles are kind of deep in your pelvic girdle. So a roller is not going to get deep enough to get in there and really release them. So that's why you need something like this. Now if you don't have that, you can use equipment such as like a tennis ball, a racket ball, a lacrosse ball is a little bit more dense and hard. So it's gonna give it more force and it's gonna maybe hurt a little bit more. So that's something you wanna work up to. But get any kind of ball and then find a wall. And you're gonna again find those hip bone points and just right inside it, you're gonna push the ball in between the wall and hip flexors. You're just gonna roll up and down slightly. You don't have to do too much. And again, you'll feel that same kind of push on the muscle and a release. You're just gonna sit and hold until you don't feel it as much. Then the other side, just push into it on that side, like this. Just rolling slightly, trying to find those trigger points. If you guys have ever foam rolled like quads, glutes, any big muscle group, you have those particular points that really feel really tender. Those are the trigger points. So you're trying to do the same thing with your hip flexors. Try and find those trigger points. All right, so that's it for myofascial release. Put these to the side. Last one we're gonna do is some banded stretching. All right, so band's really good for stretching because you can get a lot of elastic force in a band and put a lot of torque on the muscle and really stretch it a lot more than you could just pulling yourself doing a stretch. All right, so we're gonna do a banded hip flexor stretch. and it's like they call it extraction by pulling backwards on the hip joint. So get a relatively thick band. Obviously, if you're a bigger person, you're gonna need a bigger band. That's gonna create more force. If you're not quite as big, you're not gonna need as big of a band. This one is I believe 2-inch band. So you can kind of roughly tell if you don't have bands, you want to invest them. This is about a 2-inch band. And you're gonna get it high up on the hip joint as you can, and sit in that like kneeling hip flexor stretch that we did last time for the bodyweight one, and just push forward. And the band is gonna pull back on the hip joint and help stretch it. And you just wanna sit and hold, just like the other one. All right. And then we're gonna switch, demonstrate the other side. High up here. Switch like this, and just sit and hold, just pulling back and stretching that muscle for us. All right. And the farther forward, it's just like a rubber band. So the farther forward you move, the more force it's gonna generate and pull back more, right? So you just gotta find that sweet spot that works for you. And our last stretch we're gonna do is another banded stretch. I have a little bit smaller of one. You could probably use that same size. Just kind of depends on how long your femur length is. If you have really long femurs, you're gonna need a band that's not quite as thick. If you have shorter ones, you can get a thicker band. What you're gonna do is you're gonna lay the band so it's parallel with the wall, like this, and you're gonna be parallel with the wall too. And you're gonna shift like this, so you're kind of in a squat position up against the wall. So now you're perpendicular to the wall, feet flat on the ground, and you have your two ends of your bands adjust if you need to. Make sure it's sitting right on your like low back. You're gonna pull, get this band up on your knee, and get the other one up on your knee. So these are pulling, stretching your hips, and you just wanna sit and let this just sink in and pull and stretch. And just take big deep breaths. This will also kind of help with your squat positioning at the bottom of your squat. If you're not comfortable with that bottom squat position, obviously this is the bottom position of the squat, so it gets you to feel more comfortable in that position, and you just want to sit and hold it, all right? When you're done, grab, pull it off, grab, pull off, and you're good to go. All right, so those are all the stretches I have for you in myofascial release. Just to go over everything, you have your body weight kneeling hip flexor stretch. You have your so right, which, like I said, if you want to invest in that, you can. Or you can use a racquetball, tennis ball, lacrosse ball, and then you have your banded stretches if you want to invest in those. For the banded extraction pull, and then the wall squat banded stretch. All very good options. All right, you guys have a nice day. See ya.